Deep in the Siberian taiga, hundreds of kilometers from civilization, the Soviet Union built research centers that almost no one knew about. Here, they developed psychotronic weapons, studied UFOs, and conducted experiments with space and time. Thousands of scientists worked on technologies that could change the course of history. Many of them disappeared under mysterious circumstances. What really happened there? What secrets does the Siberian taiga still hide? Today, we will lift the veil of secrecy on the secret Soviet research institutes, where science bordered on the paranormal and reality bordered on science fiction. If you are interested in the mysteries of history and the riddles of the past, subscribe to the channel and like this video. And in the comments, write what you think. Are these secret studies still going on? Or are all these facilities really abandoned? Perhaps somewhere deep in the Siberian taiga, there are still laboratories operating that we know nothing about. Share your opinion. In the first half of the 20th century, the Soviet Union began to create a network of secret scientific centers in Siberia. The choice of this region was not accidental. The endless taiga expanses, remoteness from borders, low population density, and harsh climate made these places ideal for conducting secret research. Here, entire cities could be hidden from prying eyes, underground laboratories could be built, and experiments could be conducted that the rest of the world was not supposed to know about. The first closed scientific facilities appeared as early as the 1930s. At that time, the Soviet leadership realized the strategic importance of developing science and technology far from potential adversaries. Siberia was a vast territory where it was possible to create an entire system of secret cities and laboratories. These places were given code numbers instead of names, and on maps, they were either not marked at all or disguised as ordinary settlements or industrial facilities. Siberian research institutes took on particular significance after the Great Patriotic War. The beginning of the Cold War and the arms race forced the Soviet government to invest huge amounts of money in the development of new types of weapons and technologies. It was in the depths of the Siberian taiga that centers were created where they worked on the atomic project, developed missile weapons, and studied biological and chemical substances capable of changing the course of the war. These facilities were spread across Siberia, from the Urals to the Far East. Closed cities and research centers popped up everywhere in the Tomsk, Novosibirsk, and Krasnoyarsk regions, the Altai Territory, and the Irkutsk region. Some of them were located near existing settlements, while others were built from scratch in completely uninhabited areas. Special infrastructure facilities were created to serve them, including railways, airfields, and power lines. The construction of such facilities required enormous resources. Thousands of Gulag prisoners and soldiers from construction battalions erected buildings in conditions of permafrost and Siberian frosts. Many of them died from cold, disease, and accidents. Their graves are still somewhere in the taiga, nameless and forgotten. Local residents say that in some areas, it is impossible to dig the ground. There are too many remains of those who built the secret cities. Only scientists with special clearance and the military had access to the closed research institutes. Each employee underwent thorough screening by the state security services. The slightest suspicion of disloyalty could cost not only one's job, but also one's freedom. The families of scientists also lived under constant surveillance. Correspondence was checked, telephone conversations were listened to, and every step was monitored by neighbors who were informers and special service employees. Life in closed cities was unique. On the one hand, scientists received high salaries, good housing, and access to scarce goods. On the other hand, they were effectively cut off from the outside world. Leaving a closed city required special permission. Contact with relatives and friends outside the facility was strictly controlled. No one was allowed to talk about their work to anyone, not even their closest friends and family. Some research institutes specialized in specific areas of research. There were centers that dealt only with nuclear physics. Others studied new materials, and still others worked on biological weapons. But there were also laboratories whose activities are still shrouded in secrecy. It is said that experiments were conducted there that went beyond the scope of traditional science. The study of paranormal phenomena, attempts to establish contact with other dimensions, and the development of psychotronic weapons. Secret research institutes were financed through closed budget items. Officially, this money went to the construction of factories, industrial development, or geological exploration. In reality, billions of rubles were invested in the creation of laboratories where the country's best minds worked. The Soviet leadership understood that victory in the Cold War depended not only on the number of tanks and aircraft, but also on technological superiority. Transport links to closed facilities were also special. Special trains and planes delivered scientists, equipment, and materials. These flights were not published in timetables, and passengers were not allowed to talk about their trips. Railway stations near closed cities were also classified. Ordinary citizens were not allowed to get off at these stations, and local residents knew better than to ask questions about where these tracks led. Security at secret facilities was multi-layered. Soldiers with dogs patrolled the outer perimeter. Then there was a strip with minefields and high-voltage barbed wire. The inner territory was controlled by the military and KGB personnel. Every entry and exit was recorded, and any attempt at unauthorized entry was immediately suppressed. Violations of secrecy were punished with particular severity. The local population rarely knew what was happening at these facilities. Officially, they were ordinary factories, timber industry enterprises, or military units. But residents of nearby villages noticed strange things: unusual lights in the night sky, strange sounds coming from the taiga, periodic evacuations without explanation. Those who tried to approach the restricted areas disappeared or returned with memory lapses, unable to remember what had happened to them. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, many closed research institutes ceased to exist. Funding ceased, scientists dispersed, and equipment was removed or looted. Some cities were open to visitors, but many facilities remained closed. Officially, their territories were transferred to the military or special services. Unofficially, research that is unknown to the general public may still be continuing there. Today, the abandoned buildings of secret research institutes stand in the taiga like monuments to the Cold War. Broken windows, rusty equipment, faded posters with slogans — all of this is a reminder of the times when scientific life was in full swing here. Stalkers and extreme sports enthusiasts sometimes sneak into these facilities, finding strange artifacts and documents there. But many of them say that there is a special atmosphere in these places, as if the walls hold the memory of what happened here. What secrets did these scientific centers hide? Why are some of them still under guard? and what happened in the depths of the Siberian taiga in those years when Soviet science was working at the limit of its capabilities. The answers to these questions are still hidden in classified archives and in the memories of the few who worked there. Tomsk-7 became one of the most secretive facilities of the Soviet nuclear program. This city did not even have an official name, only a number. On maps, it was marked as the village of Bely Yar, or simply as an empty space. In reality, it was a huge complex where thousands of scientists and engineers worked on the creation of nuclear weapons and the development of nuclear energy. The history of Tomsk-7 began in 1949, when the Soviet Union was actively working on creating its own atomic bomb. Stalin personally oversaw this project, realizing that without nuclear weapons, the country would not be able to stand up to the United States. A location 120 kilometers from Tomsk, in the remote taiga on the banks of the Tom River, was chosen to house the production facilities. The construction of the complex was carried out under the strictest secrecy. Tens of thousands of prisoners and soldiers from construction battalions erected industrial buildings, residential houses, and infrastructure. They worked around the clock, in all weather conditions. In winter, the temperature dropped to -40 degrees, but construction did not stop. Many died from hypothermia, accidents, and disease. They were buried in unmarked graves near the construction sites. The first nuclear reactor was launched in 1955. It was one of the most powerful reactors of its time, designed to produce weapons-grade plutonium. Scientists worked without adequate radiation protection. In those years, the dangers of radiation were not yet fully understood. Many of the first employees received huge doses of radiation and died within a few years of radiation sickness. Work with radioactive materials was carried out in special hot rooms, rooms with thick walls made of lead and concrete. Operators controlled the manipulators from behind protective screens. But the technology was imperfect, and radiation leaks occurred regularly. The area around the reactors gradually turned into a contaminated zone, but even the employees themselves were not informed about this. About 100,000 people lived in Tomsk-7. The city had all the necessary infrastructure: schools, hospitals, shops, and cultural centers. Residents received higher salaries and special benefits for working in hazardous conditions. But they were not allowed to tell their relatives and friends where they worked or what they did. Even within the city, there was a strict hierarchy of secrecy. Many facilities were closed even to most local residents. The underground laboratories of Tomsk-7 are of particular interest. According to former employees, an entire network of tunnels and rooms was created underground, extending to a depth of several tens of meters. Particularly dangerous experiments were conducted there, which even many of the complex's managers did not know about. It is said that these underground facilities were used to study not only the physical properties of radioactive materials, but also their effect on the human consciousness. There are stories about strange incidents in the closed laboratories of Tomsk-7. Employees reported inexplicable phenomena: the appearance of ghostly figures, voices from empty rooms, sudden memory lapses. Some researchers attributed this to the effects of radiation on the brain, while others said that nuclear reactions opened portals to other dimensions. Officially, these cases were either denied or explained away as hallucinations caused by fatigue. In the 1960s, work began on a new type of reactor in Tomsk-7. These facilities were intended not only for the production of plutonium, but also for the generation of electricity. The Soviet Union sought to prove to the world that atomic energy could be peaceful, but at the same time, research continued on the creation of more powerful nuclear weapons. One of the most secret projects was the development of the so-called dirty bomb, a weapon that was intended not so much to destroy as to contaminate the territory with radiation for many years. Experiments were conducted at special test sites in the vicinity of Tomsk-7. Local residents noticed that after such tests, dead fish appeared in the river. Animals avoided certain areas of the forest, and vegetation took on strange, ugly forms. Accidents at Tomsk-7 facilities occurred regularly, but information about them was carefully concealed. The largest accident occurred in 1956, when radioactive substances were released from one of the reactors. A cloud of radiation covered several villages, but the residents were not evacuated or warned of the danger. Only a few days later did the military cordon off the area and remove the people, forbidding them to talk about what had happened. Medical research on the effects of radiation on humans was also conducted in Tomsk-7. Doctors monitored employees who had received high doses of radiation, studying the development of radiation sickness and mutations. Some experiments were conducted in secret. People were not told that they were being exposed to radiation. This data was used to develop methods of protecting the military and civilian population in the event of a nuclear war. In the 1970s and 1980s, Tomsk-7 continued to develop. New reactors were built, research laboratories were expanded, and the population grew. The city acquired modern buildings, well-maintained streets, and parks. But behind the outward prosperity lay a terrible reality. Tens of thousands of people lived and worked in an area of increased radiation, unaware of the real risks to their health. After the collapse of the USSR, Tomsk-7 was declassified and renamed Seversk. Part of the production was stopped, but some reactors continued to operate. The city was open to visitors, although some facilities remained closed. Today, about 110,000 people live in Seversk, many of whom still work in the nuclear industry. But what secrets do the underground laboratories of the former Tomsk-7 still hold? What happened in the closed rooms, to which even high-ranking officials did not have access? And is it true that experiments beyond the scope of traditional science were conducted there? These questions remain unanswered, and former employees prefer to remain silent, bound by non-disclosure agreements even decades later. Krasnoyarsk-26 was one of the most incredible engineering projects of the Cold War. This city was built entirely underground, 200 meters deep in the mountain range. It housed a giant complex for the production of weapons-grade plutonium, including several nuclear reactors, chemical plants, and living quarters for thousands of employees. The entire city was a huge underground anthill, protected from any outside influences. Construction began in 1958 on Khrushchev's personal orders. The Soviet leadership understood that in the event of a nuclear war, ground facilities would be destroyed by the enemy's first strikes. Therefore, it was decided to create an invulnerable underground complex capable of continuing the production of nuclear weapons even after a massive nuclear strike. Krasnoyarsk-26 was to become a guarantee that the Soviet Union would be able to strike back. A site near the small town of Zheleznogorsk in the Krasnoyarsk region was chosen for construction. The geological conditions here were suitable. Solid rock capable of withstanding even a direct hit from a nuclear bomb. A system of tunnels was drilled into the mountain, huge underground halls were created, and communications were laid. The scale of the construction was colossal. Several million cubic meters of rock were excavated. Prisoners, soldiers, and civilian workers were employed. Working conditions were extremely difficult, stuffy, dusty, and with the constant danger of cave-ins. Underground, the temperature was a constant 15 degrees Celsius, with high humidity and a lack of oxygen. Many workers developed lung diseases and heart problems. Accidents occurred regularly: rock falls, explosions during tunnel boring, accidents with equipment. The first underground reactor was launched in 1958. It was a unique facility designed specifically for underground operation. Cooling was provided by water from the Yenisei River, which was supplied through a special tunnel. The spent water was discharged back into the river, carrying radioactive isotopes with it. At that time, few people thought about the environment. The main thing was to obtain plutonium for bombs. The living quarters for employees were also located underground. Entire neighborhoods were created with apartments, shops, canteens, sports halls, and cinemas. People could go weeks without coming to the surface, working and living in an artificial environment. The lighting was electric and round the clock. There is no difference between day and night underground. This created a particular psychological burden, with many employees complaining of depression and insomnia. The ventilation system provided fresh air and removed contaminated air. Powerful fans ran continuously, creating a characteristic hum that could be heard throughout the underground city. In the event of a nuclear strike, the system switched to autonomous mode with air filtration from radioactive particles. The complex was designed to exist autonomously for several months. The Krasnoyarsk-26 security system was multi-level. Entry to the underground city was through several checkpoints. Massive airlocks could completely isolate the complex from the outside world. Each employee had a special pass with several levels of access. Surveillance cameras and sensors monitored every meter of the territory. Any violation of the regime was immediately recorded. The underground laboratories were not only used for plutonium production. Here, they studied the effects of isolation and underground conditions on the human body and psyche. This research was important for preparing for long space flights and for creating bunkers in case of nuclear war. Volunteers spent months underground, while scientists observed changes in their behavior and health. There is evidence of strange incidents in the depths of Krasnoyarsk-26. Workers reported unusual sounds coming from distant tunnels, as if someone were knocking from inside the rock. Some claim to have seen strange shadows in the dimly lit corridors that disappeared when approached. Several people disappeared without a trace. They were searched for, but never found. Officially, these cases were explained as accidents or desertion. One of the most mysterious stories is connected with the so-called deep level. It is said that below the main production facilities, there was another level, known only to a few people from the complex's management. Camouflaged tunnels led there, guarded by a special unit. What was there is still unknown. Some claim that it was a backup command post in case of war, while others talk about secret laboratories where experiments with unknown science were conducted. In the 1970s, a second, more powerful reactor was launched in Krasnoyarsk-26. By that time, plutonium production technology had improved significantly. The new facility produced more weapons-grade material at a lower cost. But, as production increased, so did the radioactive contamination of the Yenisei River. The concentration of isotopes in the water exceeded permissible limits many times over, but this was kept quiet. Employees of the underground city received huge doses of radiation. Protection was minimal, simple gowns and respirators. Many worked in hot zones without adequate protection. Cases of radiation sickness were common, but they were not publicized. The dead were buried quietly, and their relatives were told other causes of death. Medical records were classified so as not to cause panic. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, production in Krasnoyarsk-26 was halted. The reactors were mothballed, and most of the equipment was dismantled. The underground city was deserted, turning into a giant mausoleum of the Cold War. But the complex was not completely closed. Some rooms are still used by the military and special services. What is happening there now is another closely guarded secret. Today, enthusiasts and researchers are trying to penetrate the abandoned parts of the underground complex. Some succeed, finding rusty equipment, documents, and personal belongings of former employees. But many talk about strange sensations underground, a feeling of anxiety, of being watched, of the presence of something unknown. Perhaps this is due to radiation, or maybe the walls of this city really do hold the memory of their secrets. The Novosibirsk Research Institute of Psychotronics was one of the most secret facilities of Soviet science. Officially, it was listed as a laboratory for the study of biological processes, but in reality, it was working on the creation of a new type of weapon, devices capable of influencing human consciousness and psyche from a distance. This field was called psychotronics, and the Soviet leadership hoped to use it to gain a decisive advantage in the Cold War. The history of the institute began in the 1960s, when the special services received information that the Americans were conducting secret research in the field of mind control. The CIA's MK-Ultra program became known to Soviet intelligence, and the KGB demanded that a similar program be created in the USSR. To this end, a special institute was established in Novosibirsk, in Akademgorodok, disguised as an ordinary scientific organization. Professor Leonid Vasilyev, a renowned specialist in parapsychology, was appointed to head the project. Back in the 1930s, he had conducted experiments on telepathy and mental suggestion, but during the Stalin era, this research was declared pseudoscience. Now, however, the state not only allowed such work, but also generously funded it. Vasilyev received unlimited resources and the opportunity to recruit the country's best specialists. The institute studied human extrasensory abilities. Scientists attempted to scientifically prove the existence of telepathy, clairvoyance, and telekinesis. Experiments were conducted on the transmission of thoughts over distance, attempts to influence people's behavior through mental suggestion, and the study of the ability to see through opaque obstacles. People who claimed to have paranormal abilities were recruited for the experiments. One of the Institute's areas of work was the creation of technical devices to enhance human psychic abilities. Special helmets with electrodes were designed to amplify brain waves. Generators of special frequencies were developed that were supposedly capable of influencing the subconscious. Sensory deprivation chambers were created in which test subjects spent hours in complete darkness and silence, after which they exhibited unusual abilities. The experiments were often dangerous for the participants. After undergoing psychotronic exposure, Some volunteers complained of headaches, hallucinations, and sleep disturbances. There were cases of mental disorders that developed in the test subjects. But the research continued. The military demanded results, and the scientists took the risk. All participants signed a non-disclosure agreement, and information about the incidents did not leave the institute. Experiments on remote influence on people were of particular interest. Scientists tried to instill certain thoughts or actions in a person while being at a great distance from them. For this purpose, they used strong psychics, people who supposedly possessed developed psychic abilities. They concentrated on a specific task, trying to mentally force a person in another room to perform a certain action. The results of the experiments were contradictory. Sometimes it seemed that the influence really worked. The test subject performed what was mentally suggested to him. But critical scientists pointed out that this could be a simple coincidence or self-suggestion. Nevertheless, the military was interested in continuing the research. Even a small chance of success seemed reason enough to invest millions of rubles. In the 1970s, the Institute began work on the creation of psychotronic weapons. The idea was to create a device capable of causing fear, panic, hallucinations, or even death in an enemy from a distance. To this end, generators of various types of radiation were designed: electromagnetic, ultrasonic, and infrasonic. It was believed that certain frequencies could resonate with the brain and disrupt its functions. The tests were first conducted on animals, then on human volunteers. The test subjects were placed in special chambers and exposed to various types of radiation. Changes in behavior, physiological reactions, and subjective sensations were recorded. Some frequencies did indeed cause discomfort, anxiety, and even panic attacks. However, it was not possible to create a weapon capable of reliably incapacitating the enemy. There are stories that the Institute conducted experiments to establish contact with other dimensions or forms of consciousness. Allegedly, in special chambers shielded from external influences, psychics entered altered states of consciousness and reported encounters with certain entities. These beings conveyed information to them about the future, the mysteries of the universe, and technologies unknown to Earth science. The veracity of these stories is unknown, but such rumors circulated among the staff. In the 1980s, funding for the Institute began to decline. The country's leadership became disappointed in the prospects of psychotronics. Despite years of research and enormous costs, it was not possible to create a working psychic weapon. Many experiments could not be replicated, and the results were unstable. Skeptics in the scientific community spoke more and more loudly about how this entire field was pseudoscience. After the collapse of the USSR, the Psychotronics Institute was officially closed. The equipment was dismantled, and the documentation was partially destroyed and partially classified. The employees dispersed, many of them continuing to work in other fields unrelated to parapsychology. The Institute's building was transferred to another scientific organization. It seemed that this page of Soviet science had been closed forever. But in the 1990s, stories from former employees of the Institute began to emerge. Some of them claimed that research in the field of psychotronics was not entirely fruitless. Allegedly, devices capable of influencing people's emotional states were created. These technologies were transferred to the special services and continue to be used for special operations. However, there is no evidence to support these claims. All documents are classified. Today, the former building of the Psychotronics Institute houses a regular scientific laboratory. Nothing reminds us of the experiments that were conducted here. But some researchers continue to be interested in this topic. They collect evidence from former participants in the program, try to find declassified documents, and analyze indirect data. Perhaps someday, the truth about Soviet psychotronic research will become known. What if psychotronic weapons were really created? What if devices capable of controlling human consciousness are still lying somewhere in secret storage facilities? And are these technologies still being used secretly even today? Deep in the Siberian taiga, there were laboratories engaged in the study of phenomena that official science considered impossible. These research institutes worked on studying anomalous zones, unidentified flying objects, poltergeists, and other paranormal phenomena. The Soviet leadership understood that if such phenomena really existed, they could be used for military purposes. Therefore, special scientific groups were created to find a rational explanation and practical application for these anomalies. One such laboratory was located near Lake Baikal. Here, they studied strange lights that were regularly observed in the sky above the lake. For centuries, local residents had told stories of sky fires that appeared from under the water, rose into the sky, and performed incredible maneuvers. In the 1960s, the military decided to seriously study this phenomenon. There was too much reliable evidence to ignore. Scientists set up an observation station on the shore of the lake with powerful telescopes, radars, cameras, and other equipment. The sky and the surface of the water were monitored around the clock. And indeed, strange objects were regularly recorded, appearing from the depths of Lake Baikal, hovering over the water, then rapidly soaring upward and disappearing. Their speed exceeded the capabilities of any known technology of the time. Particularly interesting were cases when these objects were recorded simultaneously, visually, on radar and on film. This ruled out the possibility of hallucinations or observer errors. The military tried to intercept these objects with fighter jets, but the planes could not catch up with the unidentified craft. When military aircraft approached, the objects either disappeared instantly or moved away at incredible speeds. At the same time, evidence from people who claimed to have observed these objects up close was studied. Fishermen reported encounters with glowing balls that hovered over their boats, causing electrical equipment to malfunction. Several witnesses claimed to have seen huge objects underwater that resembled metal structures. Some even spoke of encounters with creatures that emerged from these objects, although such testimonies were viewed with skepticism. Laboratories attempted to develop a theory to explain the nature of these phenomena. One hypothesis suggested that there was a base of an unknown civilization in the depths of Lake Baikal. Perhaps these were representatives of extraterrestrial intelligence who had been observing humanity for a long time, remaining unnoticed. Another version said that these were portals to parallel dimensions through which objects from other realities penetrated our world. Another secret laboratory studied anomalous zones in Siberia. There were several such places, areas of taiga, where strange phenomena occurred, physical laws were violated, and technology failed. One of the most famous was the area around the Podkamenaya Tunguska River, where the famous explosion occurred in 1908. Although it was officially explained as a meteorite fall, many scientists had their doubts. Expeditions to the Tunguska zone continued for decades. Scientists found strange artifacts there, measured unusual magnetic fields, and recorded abnormal readings on their instruments. Some researchers claimed that the explosion of 1908 was caused not by a meteorite, but by the crash of an alien spacecraft. Allegedly, the wreckage of the extraterrestrial craft is still hidden in the taiga, and the special services secretly removed the most interesting finds for study. Another laboratory studied the phenomenon of poltergeist, inexplicable physical phenomena in the presence of certain people. They collected information about cases when objects began to move spontaneously in houses, incomprehensible sounds were heard, and fires broke out for no apparent reason. Scientists tried to understand the mechanism of these phenomena and find out whether they could be controlled or reproduced artificially. Experiments showed that poltergeist is usually associated with the presence of people in a certain psychological state, most often adolescents during puberty or people experiencing severe stress. A hypothesis arose that the human psyche, under certain conditions, is capable of influencing physical reality. If this is the case, then it would be possible to learn how to use this ability, for example, to sabotage enemy equipment or create panic among the enemy. One of the strangest areas of research was attempts to establish contact with other forms of intelligence. In specially equipped rooms, isolated from external influences, mediums and psychics entered a trance, trying to communicate with unknown entities. Sometimes they reported receiving information that they allegedly could not have known by normal means. Skeptics explained this as fraud or self-deception, but the leadership demanded that the experiments continue. There is evidence that an incident occurred in one of these laboratories, after which the research was shut down. Allegedly, during a communication session, the medium entered an unusually deep trance and began to speak in an unknown language. His words were recorded on tape, and then attempts were made to decipher them. Linguists were unable to identify the language. It was unlike any known language. But analysis of the structure revealed that it was indeed a language and not a meaningless set of sounds. Even stranger was the fact that after this session, the medium remained in a semi-conscious state for several days. When he came to, it turned out that he remembered nothing about what had happened. Moreover, he developed abilities that he had not had before. He could predict certain events and sense other people's emotions. Doctors could find no physical explanation for these changes. After this incident, the management decided to temporarily suspend such experiments. It was recognized that scientists were dealing with phenomena whose nature they did not understand, and that continuing the experiments could be dangerous. The laboratory was mothballed, the documentation was classified, and the participants were forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. But after a few years, the work resumed. The military did not want to miss out on the potential opportunity to obtain new weapons. In the 1980s, funding for anomalous research was reduced, but not completely stopped. Individual groups of scientists continued to work, although the scale of the projects was significantly reduced. After the collapse of the USSR, most of these laboratories were closed, but some of the research continued as part of military programs. There is a belief that even today, somewhere in closed research institutes, anomalous phenomena are being studied, but this is not discussed publicly. What did Soviet scientists actually discover during these studies? Is there evidence of the existence of paranormal phenomena? And if so, why is this information still classified? Biological experiments conducted in secret Siberian laboratories remain one of the most classified topics in Soviet science. Here, scientists worked on creating new types of bacteriological weapons, studied the possibilities of genetic engineering, and conducted experiments on living organisms. Many of these studies violated every conceivable ethical norm. But in the context of the Cold War, the end justified the means. Victory in a possible conflict seemed more important than any moral considerations. One of the largest biological laboratories was located in the Koltsovo district near Novosibirsk. Officially, it was the Vector Research Institute of Virology and Biotechnology, which studied dangerous infections. But in parallel with medical research, work was also being done here to create biological weapons of mass destruction. The USSR signed an international convention banning such weapons, but secret development continued. The Vector Laboratories housed one of the most complete collections of deadly viruses and bacteria in the world. There were strains of smallpox, plague, anthrax, Ebola, and many other dangerous infections. Scientists studied their properties and looked for ways to increase their contagiousness and lethality. The work was carried out in special boxes with the highest level of biological protection, but accidents still happened. Several employees died from accidental infection. In the 1970s, there was a leak of the smallpox virus, and several people in a nearby village fell ill. The authorities quickly localized the outbreak and carried out mass vaccination, but the information about the incident was classified. The relatives of the deceased were told that they had died of ordinary pneumonia. Documents about this outbreak were destroyed, and witnesses were forced to remain silent. A special area of research was the genetic modification of pathogenic organisms. Scientists attempted to create superbacteria and superviruses that were resistant to antibiotics and vaccines. The idea was to have a weapon against which the enemy would have no defense. They worked with methods of selection, irradiation, and chemical mutagenesis. Later, when genetic engineering technologies appeared, they began to directly modify the genetic code of microorganisms. One of the most sinister projects was an attempt to create an artificial virus that combined the properties of several dangerous diseases. For example, the contagiousness of influenza with the lethality of Ebola, or an asymptomatic incubation period with sudden death. Such a weapon could kill millions of people before it was detected and identified. How far this work has progressed is officially unknown. There is evidence that experiments were conducted on humans in remote laboratories. Prisoners were used, who were promised reduced sentences or improved conditions of detention. They were infected with various infections and tested with experimental vaccines and drugs. Many of the test subjects died, their bodies were cremated, and the documents were destroyed. Officially, these people were listed as having died of natural causes or having attempted to escape and been shot during the escape. There were attempts to create biological weapons with targeted effects, viruses or bacteria that would only affect people of a certain race or with certain genetic characteristics. Theoretically, such weapons could destroy the population of an enemy country without affecting their own citizens. Scientists studied the genetic differences between populations, looking for vulnerabilities. But they never succeeded in creating a truly effective racial weapon. Humanity is too genetically homogeneous. In parallel with military programs, research was conducted on prolonging life and improving human abilities. The mechanisms of aging were studied, and attempts were made to find ways to stop or slow down this process. Experiments were conducted with various substances, hormones, and radiation. Some researchers believed that it was possible to create a serum of immortality, or at least significantly increase human lifespan. As part of these programs, experiments were conducted on tissue and organ regeneration. Scientists tried to teach the body to repair damaged parts, as some animals do. They studied salamanders, which are capable of regrowing limbs, and planarians, which can regenerate from a tiny fragment of their body. The goal was ambitious: to create a technology that would allow soldiers to quickly recover from injuries or even regrow lost limbs. There are references to attempts to create human-animal hybrids. Allegedly, experiments were conducted to cross human cells with monkey cells in order to obtain a creature with the strength of an animal and the intelligence of a human. Such creatures could become ideal soldiers, strong, resilient, and fearless. Official science categorically denies the possibility of such experiments, but rumors about them periodically resurface. In the 1980s, an incident occurred in a biological laboratory that nearly led to disaster. As a result of a staff error, an experimental strain of bacteria modified to increase virulence was leaked. Several employees fell ill with an unknown disease characterized by high fever and internal bleeding. The laboratory was immediately isolated, and the patients were placed in quarantine. Fortunately, doctors managed to develop an antibiotic that cured the infection. All those infected recovered, although some suffered irreversible damage to their internal organs. After this incident, safety measures were tightened, but work on dangerous pathogens continued. The risks were considered acceptable for the sake of potential military advantages. After the collapse of the USSR, the fate of biological laboratories was ambiguous. The Vector Institute continued its work, but now under international control. Collections of dangerous pathogens were partially destroyed and partially preserved. Military programs were officially shut down, but many Western experts doubt that all military biological research has really been discontinued. Some former employees say that some of the most secret materials were taken to an unknown location before the programs were shut down. Perhaps there are secret storage facilities somewhere with samples of biological weapons and documentation on their creation. These materials could pose a huge danger if they fall into the wrong hands. Today, the buildings of some closed secret biological laboratories in Siberian research institutes were engaged in developments that went far beyond ethical norms. Experiments with genetic modifications were conducted here, new types of pathogens were created, and methods of controlling biological processes at a level not yet achieved by official medicine were studied. Much of this work was conducted in circumvention of international conventions banning biological weapons. One of the largest biological research centers was located in the Kolyma region, in a closed settlement that was simply marked on maps as Facility Number 112. In the 1950s, Gulag prisoners were brought there and became unwitting participants in medical experiments. Officially, this was called scientific and practical research to improve the health of the population of the far north. But in reality, new types of biological weapons were being tested there. Prisoners were injected with experimental vaccines, infected with various diseases, and observed as the infection developed without treatment. The goal was to understand how various pathogens affect the body in conditions of cold, malnutrition, and physical exhaustion. This data was then used to create weapons that would be particularly effective against enemy troops operating in harsh climatic conditions. Documents, partially declassified in the 1990s, confirmed that the Kolyma laboratories worked with plague, anthrax, typhus, tularemia, and other dangerous infections. Scientists created strains resistant to antibiotics, modified bacteria so that they remained viable at low temperatures, and developed methods for the mass distribution of pathogens through air, water, and food. The mortality rate among the test subjects was horrific. According to some estimates, more than 80% of prisoners who ended up in biological laboratories died within a year. The bodies were cremated in special furnaces or buried in mass graves flooded with bleach. No records were kept of the identities of the deceased. They simply disappeared from the paperwork, as if they had never existed. In the 1960s, the experiments became even more radical. Scientists began working with genetic modifications, trying to create new forms of life. Primitive methods were used, but even they produced frightening results. Mutants appeared, organisms with altered genetic structures and unusual properties. Most of them were unviable, but some survived. A special area of focus was attempts to create biological soldiers, people with enhanced physical characteristics. Researchers tried to increase endurance, strength, pain tolerance, and reaction speed. To do this, they used hormonal drugs, genetic manipulation, and surgical intervention. The test subjects were military volunteers and prisoners. Most of the experiments ended tragically, with death or irreversible injury. There is evidence of work with so-called chimeras, the creation of organisms combining the DNA of different species. Scientists tried to cross human cells with animals, hoping to get creatures with unique abilities. These experiments were so secret that even many biological program leaders didn't know about them. What happened to the results of these experiments is unknown, but there are rumors of strange creatures seen in the taiga near abandoned laboratories. In the 1970s, a new direction emerged: the development of psychotropic substances capable of affecting the mind. The goal was to create chemical weapons that would not kill, but would deprive the enemy of the will to resist, causing mass hallucinations, panic, and uncontrollable aggression. The tests were conducted on prisoners from psychiatric clinics who were brought to closed laboratories. One such substance was a drug codenamed Substance 15. It caused a state of complete apathy. People lost interest in everything, stopped responding to external stimuli, and became like living corpses. Another drug, Substance 33, on the contrary, caused uncontrollable aggression. People attacked everyone around them, including themselves. These substances were so dangerous that they were stored in special underground vaults under heavy guard. Biological laboratories in Siberia also studied the effects of extreme conditions on the human body. Test subjects were placed in chambers with very low or very high temperatures, deprived of sleep for weeks, and kept in conditions of sensory deprivation. The goal was to understand the limits of human capabilities, to determine under what conditions the body begins to break down and the psyche begins to collapse. There were experiments on artificially prolonging life. Scientists worked on creating drugs that would slow down aging, enhance tissue regeneration, and increase the body's vitality. To this end, hormones, extracts from various organs, and genetic manipulation were used. Some test subjects did indeed show slowed aging, but the side effects were horrific: cancer, mutations, mental disorders. Of particular interest is the work on creating biological toxins that would leave no traces. The goal was to develop poisons that would cause death that looked natural, from a heart attack, stroke, or common illness. Such substances were intended for covert operations by special services. It is known that some of these toxins were actually used to eliminate undesirable individuals. In the 1980s, biological laboratories began working with viruses. Scientists tried to create artificial viruses that would be deadly but controllable. That is, there would be a vaccine to protect their troops. These developments were carried out in conditions of maximum secrecy, as they violated all international agreements. Some of the viruses created were so dangerous that they were destroyed for fear of accidental leakage. With the collapse of the USSR, many biological laboratories were closed. But what happened to the materials stored there? Samples of pathogens, genetically modified organisms, experimental drugs. All of this required special storage and disposal conditions. There are fears that some of the materials were taken abroad. Some fell into the hands of criminal groups, and some simply remained in abandoned buildings. Today, some former biological laboratories pose an environmental threat. Contaminated soil, groundwater with high levels of toxic substances, and hazardous waste disposal sites all pose risks to the population of nearby areas. But information about these sites is classified, and cleanup is not being carried out due to a lack of funding. What other experiments were conducted in secret biological laboratories? How many people died as a result of this research? And is there a danger that the pathogens created there will one day escape? The answers to these questions may be more frightening than the darkest assumptions. The development of climate weapons was one of the most ambitious and secret projects of Soviet science. The idea was to learn how to control the weather, create artificial natural disasters, and use the forces of nature against the enemy. Special geophysical laboratories equipped with unique equipment were set up in Siberia to work on this project. The Climate Research Center was located in Yakutia, near the village of Tiksi on the coast of the Laptov Sea. In 1963, a complex of antennas and generators designed to influence the ionosphere was built there. Officially, it was a research center for studying the aurora borealis and radio communications in high latitudes. In reality, scientists were working on creating a weather control system. The theoretical basis of the project was simple. By exposing the ionosphere to powerful radio waves, it was possible to change its electrical properties. This, in turn, affected the movement of air masses, cloud formation, and atmospheric pressure. By changing these parameters, it was theoretically possible to cause rain, droughts, hurricanes, and frosts in the right places at the right time. The first experiments were cautious. Scientists tried to cause rain over a certain area, disperse clouds, and change the direction of the wind. The results were mixed. Sometimes they really managed to influence the weather, but the effect was short-lived and unpredictable. The atmosphere is too complex a system, where everything is interconnected, and interference with one parameter caused unforeseen changes in others. As data accumulated, the power of the installations increased. By the 1970s, the Yakutsk complex could generate pulses with a power of billions of watts. Such energy was capable of creating artificial holes in the ionosphere that affected the Earth's magnetic field. Local residents reported strange phenomena. unusual auroras, strange animal behavior, and radio communication failures. There are documents confirming that Soviet scientists attempted to create an artificial tsunami. The idea was to use underwater explosions to create a wave that would crash onto the enemy's coast. The experiments were conducted in the Sea of Okhotsk. The results are classified, but it is known that one such wave was indeed created and reached a height of more than 50 meters. Another area of work was the creation of artificial earthquakes. Geophysicists studied tectonic faults and looked for ways to cause plate movement. Theoretically, this could be achieved by pumping large volumes of water into certain layers of the Earth's crust, or by means of directed explosions. Experiments were conducted in seismically active areas of Siberia. Some researchers attribute several earthquakes that occurred during those years to these experiments. Work on climate weapons was also carried out in other regions. In the Novosibirsk region, there was a laboratory that studied ways to create artificial hurricanes. Scientists worked with aerosols that were sprayed into the atmosphere and changed the conditions for cloud formation. Under certain conditions, this did indeed cause strong winds and storms, but it was almost impossible to control the direction and strength of the hurricane. Of particular interest are developments in the creation of artificial droughts. The idea was to spray substances over enemy territory that would prevent the formation of rain clouds. This would lead to crop failure, water shortages, and famine. Experiments were conducted over uninhabited areas of Siberia. The results showed that the technology worked, but its large-scale application had unpredictable consequences. In the 1980s, developments appeared on the creation of ozone holes over enemy territory. Scientists discovered that certain chemicals destroy the ozone layer. Local depletion of the ozone layer would lead to a sharp increase in ultraviolet radiation, which would cause mass illness, vegetation death, and ecological disaster. This technology was considered so dangerous that it was classified at the highest level. Geophysical research in Siberia also included work with the Earth's magnetic field. Theoretically, by creating powerful electromagnetic pulses, it was possible to temporarily disrupt all electronics over a large area. Such a weapon was called an electromagnetic bomb. Tests showed that the technology was viable, and today several countries have such systems. There is evidence of attempts to influence volcanic activity. Experiments were conducted in the Kamchatka region to stimulate eruptions. The idea was to provoke an eruption by means of directed explosions or pumping water into magma chambers. This could be used as a weapon. Volcanic ash would block out the sun, temperatures would drop, and famine would ensue. Fortunately, these experiments were unsuccessful or were not carried through to completion. Climate weapons posed a double threat. On the one hand, they could cause enormous damage to the enemy. On the other hand, the Earth's atmosphere and oceans are a single system, and interference in one place could have unpredictable consequences around the world. Scientists understood this, but the military demanded results. After the end of the Cold War, many programs to create climate weapons were officially shut down. International agreements were signed to ban such developments. But technology does not disappear. The knowledge and equipment remain. There are fears that work continues in secret laboratories, only under different names. Today, abnormal weather events are becoming more frequent. Inexplicable droughts, floods, and hurricanes of unprecedented strength. Officially, This is explained by climate change due to the greenhouse effect. But some researchers believe that some of these cataclysms are the result of deliberate action. Is someone testing climate weapons? Or is this just paranoia? What really happened in the Yakut laboratories? How far did Soviet scientists advance in weather control? And are these installations still operating, hidden in the Siberian tundra? The whole truth may be far more frightening than we think. Experiments with space and time. It sounds like science fiction, but such research was actually conducted in secret laboratories in Siberia. Soviet physicists worked on theories that suggested the possibility of warping space-time, creating portals between distant points, and even time travel. How far they progressed in these developments is one of the most closely guarded secrets. The Center for Research on Space-Time Anomalies was located near Krasnoyarsk, in an underground complex built in the early 1970s. The laboratory was called Object 203 and was so secret that only a few dozen people in the country's leadership knew of its existence. Even employees of neighboring research institutes had no idea that such revolutionary projects were being worked on nearby. The theoretical basis for the research was laid by physicist Anatoly Nikolaevich Parshin, a student of the famous Landau. Parshin developed a mathematical model according to which, under certain conditions, it was possible to create a local curvature of space-time. This required enormous amounts of energy and special materials with exotic properties. The government allocated unlimited funding for the project. The first experiments were modest. Scientists tried to create microscopic wormholes, tunnels in space-time. Powerful magnetic fields, laser installations, and particle accelerators were used. Theoretically, if a stable wormhole could be created, it would be possible to transmit information or even matter through it, instantly moving objects over enormous distances. The results of the experiments were contradictory. Sometimes the instruments recorded anomalies that could be interpreted as short-term distortions of space. Objects placed in the experimental zone sometimes disappeared for a fraction of a second, and then reappeared. Scientists could not explain where they had gone during those moments. Whether this was teleportation or simply a technical glitch remained unclear. In the mid-1970s, an attempt was made to conduct a larger-scale experiment. A huge facility was built, a ring particle accelerator with a diameter of 3 kilometers located deep underground. The idea was to accelerate particles to speeds close to the speed of light and collide them at a specific point. The energy of the collision was supposed to create a microscopic black hole that would evaporate almost instantly, but at the moment of its existence would distort space-time. The experiment was conducted in 1976. What exactly happened is still unknown. Officially, a technical malfunction and temporary closure of the facility were announced. However, there are eyewitness accounts of strange phenomena. Allegedly, on the day of the experiment, within a radius of several kilometers from the laboratory, people observed distortions in space. Objects appeared stretched or compressed, and animals panicked. Several laboratory employees disappeared after the experiment. Officially, they were declared dead as a result of the accident, but their bodies were never found. According to rumors, these people fell into the wormhole that was created and ended up in an unknown place or time. After this incident, Parshin was removed from the project management, and he himself died a few years later under mysterious circumstances. But the research continued. The new head, Professor Valery Mikhailovich Kostrov, focused on a different approach. Instead of trying to create a physical wormhole, he worked on the theory of quantum teleportation. The idea was to transfer not the object itself, but information about its quantum state, and then recreate the object in another place. Experiments were first conducted with elementary particles, then with atoms and molecules. By the early 1980s, scientists were able to teleport simple organic compounds over a distance of several meters. It was a huge breakthrough, but a frightening question arose. What if a living being were teleported? Would it be the same after restoration, or would it just be a copy? Despite ethical concerns, experiments with living organisms were conducted. First bacteria, then insects, then mice. The results were ambiguous. Formally, the organisms survived and functioned, but some scientists claimed that subtle changes were taking place in them. Mice that underwent teleportation behaved strangely, as if something in them had changed at a level that could not be measured by instruments. There are rumors that experiments were also conducted on humans. Allegedly, volunteers were found among the laboratory staff who were willing to take risks for the sake of science. What happened to them is unknown. Official documents deny any such experiments. But some former employees of the facility hint that the experiments were indeed conducted, and the results were so strange and frightening that the project was immediately shut down. Another area of research was attempts to influence the flow of time. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time slows down when approaching large masses or when moving at high speeds. Scientists tried to create local bubbles where time would flow differently. If successful, it would be possible to freeze an object in time, or, conversely, accelerate its aging. Experiments have shown that it is possible to create a measurable effect of time slowing down, but it requires energy comparable to that of stars. Nevertheless, microscopic effects were recorded. Atomic clocks in the experiment zone ran slightly slower than the control clocks. This confirmed the theory, but practical application remained a long way off. In the late 1980s, shortly before the collapse of the USSR, another incident occurred in the laboratory. The details are unknown, but the facility was urgently evacuated, and the entrances to the underground complex were filled with concrete. According to some reports, during another experiment, an unstable spatial anomaly was created that could not be controlled. Allegedly, this anomaly still exists, sealed under a thick layer of concrete and earth. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fate of the project is unknown. Many scientists emigrated, and the documentation was destroyed or taken away. The underground complex near Krasnoyarsk does not officially exist, but satellite images show strange structures in the area, and local residents talk about unusual phenomena: flashes of light, strange sounds from underground, areas where compasses refuse to work. How close were Soviet scientists to creating a working teleportation system? Did they really manage to distort the flow of time? And what kind of anomaly is locked away in the underground laboratory? The answers to these questions could overturn our understanding of reality. The study of the limits of human capabilities was another secret area of Soviet science. Siberian research institutes developed programs to identify and develop superpowers, which scientists believed were hidden in every person and could be revealed under certain conditions. This involved not only physical abilities, but also abilities considered paranormal. The Institute for the Study of Human Potential was located in Barnaul, in the Altai region. The choice of location was not accidental. The Altai region has long been considered a place of power where, according to legend, ordinary people acquired extraordinary abilities. Scientists plan to use both scientific methods and traditional practices of the peoples of Siberia to develop the hidden potential of humans. The program began in 1971 with the recruitment of volunteers. They were looking for people with outstanding physical abilities, high intelligence, and good stress resistance. Candidates underwent a rigorous selection process, including medical examinations, psychological tests, and polygraph tests. Only a few were selected from thousands of applicants. Those selected were offered the opportunity to become part of a secret program, without revealing its true purpose. The first stage of training was aimed at developing physical abilities. The test subjects followed a special program that included extreme physical exertion, breathing exercises, meditation, and the use of drugs that stimulate hormone production. The results exceeded expectations. The participants demonstrated strength, endurance, and reaction speed that significantly exceeded normal human capabilities. But physical abilities were only the beginning. The main goal of the program was to develop paranormal abilities. The subjects were taught to control their bioelectric field, sense the fields of other people, and influence surrounding objects with the power of their minds. The training was conducted in special chambers, isolated from external electromagnetic influences. The methods included long meditation sessions, sometimes lasting for days. Participants were given hallucinogenic substances derived from Siberian plants traditionally used by shamans. Under the influence of these substances, people could supposedly achieve an altered state of consciousness in which paranormal abilities manifested more vividly. Some participants in the program did indeed demonstrate unusual abilities. There were cases of telepathy, when one person could accurately reproduce the thoughts of another person in a neighboring room. Cases of telekinesis were recorded, when objects moved without physical contact. One of the participants, named Sergei, could change his body temperature, heating his palms to 70 degrees or cooling them to near zero. A special focus of the program was the development of the ability to astral projection, the exit of consciousness from the body. The subjects claimed that they could separate their consciousness from their physical bodies and observe their surroundings from a point outside their bodies. Scientists tried to verify this by placing objects in places inaccessible to normal observation. Some participants were indeed able to describe these objects, even though they could not physically see them. However, the program also had its dark side. Intensive training and the use of psychoactive substances led to mental disorders. Some participants suffered from hallucinations, loss of touch with reality, and depression. There were cases of suicide. But the program continued. The military wanted to obtain super soldiers capable of performing tasks that were beyond the reach of ordinary people. In the late 1970s, the Institute began training a group of clairvoyants, people capable of obtaining information about distant objects without physical contact with them. This technique was called remote viewing. The clairvoyant was put into a special state of consciousness, given the coordinates of the object, and then described what was there. The accuracy of the descriptions was astonishing. Far-sighted people were used for espionage. They described secret military objects in other countries, reported on troop movements, and even tried to eavesdrop on conversations in closed rooms. How effective this activity was is a moot point. Skeptics believe that most of the hits were coincidental or the result of cold reading. But former intelligence officers claim that the clairvoyants did indeed provide valuable intelligence information. Another area of the Institute's work was studying the possibility of influencing health through the power of thought. Some participants in the program demonstrated the ability to accelerate wound healing, lower blood pressure, and even affect tumors. The mechanism behind this phenomenon was explained by the ability of the mind to influence physiological processes through the nervous and endocrine systems. The most exotic experiments involved attempts to establish contact with the collective unconscious, or the information field of the Earth. The theory was that there is a global field of information that can be accessed under certain conditions. People in an altered state of consciousness could supposedly gain knowledge they did not have and see events of the past or future. In the 1980s, the program reached its peak. Several groups of people with developed paranormal abilities were created. They were used in special operations, from intelligence gathering to attempts to influence the health and psyche of important figures in other countries. There is evidence of psychic attacks when clairvoyants tried to cause illness or mental disorders in their targets. With the collapse of the USSR, the program was officially closed. Many participants went their separate ways. Some emigrated, others returned to their normal lives. But the abilities they had developed remained. Some of them now work as healers, psychics, or consultants. Others prefer to remain silent about their past, fearing that no one will believe them or that they will be exploited again. How real were the abilities demonstrated by the program's participants? Can paranormal abilities be developed through training? And does this work continue somewhere else under different names? The answers to these questions could change our understanding of human potential. The underground complexes and bunkers built in Siberia during the Cold War were entire cities beneath the ground. They were intended to shelter the country's leadership, military, scientists, and their research in the event of nuclear war. The scale of this underground construction was colossal, and many of these facilities still exist today, hidden deep in the earth and mountains. The largest underground complex was located in the Novosibirsk region, near the city of Berdsk. Construction began in 1958 and continued for almost 20 years. The complex extended to a depth of more than 300 meters and covered an area of about 100 square kilometers. It could accommodate up to 50,000 people at a time for several years without access to the surface. The construction was carried out by prisoners and military builders. Thousands of people worked around the clock, digging tunnels in the rock, reinforcing the arches, and creating a life support system. The mortality rate was horrific. According to some estimates, more than 15,000 people died during the construction of the Berdsk complex. They were buried directly in the worked-out mines, covered with rock. The complex was designed to withstand a direct nuclear bomb strike. The ceilings were up to 50 meters thick and made of reinforced concrete. The entrances were protected by massive airtight doors weighing hundreds of tons. The air filtration system could even clean the air of radioactive particles. Underground rivers provided water, and huge warehouses contained food supplies for years. A complete infrastructure was created inside the complex. There were living quarters for management and specialists, canteens, medical centers, even cinemas and sports halls. A special block was occupied by command posts, from where it was possible to control the troops, missile installations, and the entire defense of the country. There was backup equipment for all the most important control systems, but the most mysterious part of the complex was the secret laboratories on the lowest levels. Only a few people had access to them. Rumor had it that experiments were conducted there that were to remain secret, even in the event of victory in the war. There was talk of developing new types of weapons, studying ways for humans to survive after a global conflict, and even cryogenic chambers for freezing people. The underground complex had several exits to the surface, disguised as ordinary utility buildings. One of the exits was located in an abandoned mine, another under a supposedly functioning factory, and the third in a forest, covered by a thick layer of soil and vegetation. These exits were guarded constantly, but in such a way as not to attract attention. The complex's communication system was autonomous and secure. Deep underground, cables connected Berdsk with other underground facilities throughout Siberia. There was a whole network of such complexes connected into a single system. In the event of war, the country's leadership could move between them through underground tunnels without going out onto the radiation-contaminated surface. The complex's power supply was provided by underground power stations, both diesel generators and, according to some sources, small nuclear reactors were used. Fuel and nuclear material were stockpiled for decades of operation. The cooling system used underground water, which was then purified and reused. In the 1970s, a special storage facility for cultural treasures was created in the complex. Works of art from museums, rare books from libraries, and scientific archives were brought there. There are conspiracy theories that some kind of work is still going on in the underground complexes of Siberia. Allegedly, there are secret laboratories, testing grounds, and even prisons for particularly dangerous criminals or people who are undesirable to the regime. Officially, this is denied, but such a possibility cannot be completely ruled out. What is hidden in the underground tunnels of Siberia? What secrets are locked in airtight chambers hundreds of meters below the surface? And is there still some kind of activity going on there that the general public is unaware of? The answers are buried as deep as the complexes themselves. The disappearance of scientists working in secret research institutes in Siberia became one of the darkest chapters of the Cold War. Hundreds of specialists vanished without a trace under mysterious circumstances. Officially, they were declared dead in accidents, died of illness, or simply went missing. But relatives and colleagues suspected that the real reasons for the disappearances were quite different. The first cases of mass disappearances occurred in the late 1950s. A group of 12 nuclear physicists working in Tomsk-7 went on a business trip to Moscow to participate in a scientific conference. The plane took off from Tomsk, but never reached the capital. Search teams found debris in the taiga, but the bodies of the passengers were not found. Officially, this was explained as a plane crash, but experts noted some oddities. The debris was scattered over too large an area, as if there had been an explosion in the air. In the 1960s, disappearances became more frequent. Scientists disappeared during expeditions to remote areas of Siberia, on their way home, sometimes right from their apartments in closed cities. Relatives were told that the person had died in an accident or suddenly died of a heart attack, but the body was shown in a closed coffin, and sometimes not returned at all. citing the need for cremation due to sanitary standards. Professor Igor Vasilyevich Tarasov, one of the leading experts in psychotronics, disappeared in 1967. He left the institute in the evening and was never seen again. The professor's car was found on a deserted road with the engine running, his documents and personal belongings still inside. There were no signs of a struggle or violence. The man simply vanished. The official investigation yielded no results. There is a theory that some scientists were eliminated by the secret services for fear of leaks of classified information. If an employee showed signs of disloyalty, had contacts with foreigners, or demonstrated psychological instability, they could be quietly removed. Such eliminations were disguised as accidents, suicides, or natural deaths. The KGB's methods were honed to perfection. Another version links the disappearances to the experiments themselves. Some studies were so dangerous that they led to the death of participants. Working with radiation, toxic substances, and experimental technologies often ended tragically. But admitting this would have meant revealing the nature of the research. So the dead were simply removed from the lists, and their families were told any plausible story. Cases where entire research groups disappeared were particularly alarming. In 1973, an expedition of 8 people went to the Yakut taiga to study an anomalous zone. After 2 weeks, contact with them was lost. The search party found their camp in perfect order: tents, equipment, personal belongings, food. But the people themselves were gone, neither alive nor dead. They seemed to have vanished into thin air. The KGB archives contain files on hundreds of such disappearances. After partial declassification in the 1990s, researchers gained access to some of the documents. It turned out that many cases had been investigated, but the results were classified as top secret. What the investigators found remains a mystery. Most of the archives are still classified. Some of the missing scientists were found years later in completely unexpected places. There is a known case of a physicist who disappeared in 1971 and was found in 1985 in a psychiatric hospital in Magadan. He did not remember what had happened to him during those 14 years and could not explain how he ended up in Magadan. A medical examination showed signs of prolonged exposure to unknown drugs. There is evidence of secret prisons for scientists who knew too much. Allegedly, such specialists were not killed, but isolated in special institutions where they continued to work, but were completely cut off from the outside world. These prison laboratories were located in the most remote areas of Siberia. Security was such that escape was impossible. Scientists who defected constituted a special category. Some specialists who worked in secret research institutes tried to flee to the West. Most of these attempts were suppressed at the planning stage, but a few people still managed to cross the border. After that, purges began in Siberia. Everyone who had contact with a defector was interrogated, checked, and sometimes arrested. Some of these people also disappeared. There are interesting cases when scientists disappeared along with the results of their research. In 1979, an entire department of a laboratory engaged in the development of a new type of power plant disappeared. 8 people, all documents, drawings, prototypes, everything disappeared overnight. The laboratory building was sealed off, and the area was cordoned off by troops. A month later, it was announced that an accident had occurred, everyone had died, and the materials had been destroyed. But no traces of an accident were found. The relatives of the missing scientists tried for years to find out the truth, but were met with a wall of silence. Appeals to various authorities went unanswered. Those who showed particular persistence were warned about the need to keep state secrets. Some were threatened with repression. Most relatives preferred to accept the situation and not ask questions. After the collapse of the USSR, some secrets began to be revealed. It turned out that some of the missing scientists had indeed died as a result of experiments or accidents. Others were killed by the secret services for various reasons. But a significant number of cases remained unexplained. People disappeared under circumstances that defied all logic. There is a hypothesis that some disappearances are related to experiments in teleportation or time travel. If such technologies were indeed being developed, then unsuccessful experiments could have led to the disappearance of people in the literal sense. They were transported to an unknown place or time. It sounds fantastic, but other explanations are sometimes even more incredible. The archives that could shed light on the fate of the missing scientists are still inaccessible. KGB documents stored in the FSB's special archives are classified and cannot be declassified. Relatives are denied access on the grounds of national security. Why are these cases still secret even after decades? What is written there that cannot be made public? How many scientists actually disappeared in the secret research institutes of Siberia? Where did they go? Were they victims of repression, accidents, or something even stranger? The answers to these questions were taken with them by those who made the decisions and gave the orders. And the secret continues to be kept in classified archives and in the memories of the few remaining witnesses. Contact with unidentified objects was a topic considered absolutely secret during the Soviet era. But documents that became available after the collapse of the USSR confirm that there were indeed many UFO sightings in Siberia, and some of them had characteristics that cannot be explained by known physics. Moreover, there is evidence of attempts to establish contact with these objects. One of the most famous events took place in 1984, near a military airfield in the Tomsk region. At night, radars detected an object approaching the base at high speed. The officer on duty scrambled fighter jets to intercept it. The pilots visually observed a glowing disk with a diameter of about 50 meters hovering above the runway. The object did not respond to radio signals and maneuvered in a way that no known aircraft could. When the fighters attempted to approach, the object instantly accelerated and disappeared. The speed recorded by radar exceeded 10,000 kilometers per hour. No aircraft in the world had such characteristics. A few minutes later, the object reappeared, now over the other end of the airfield. This continued for about an hour. Then the object rose vertically and disappeared into space. The entire incident was carefully documented and immediately classified. Similar incidents occurred regularly over military facilities in Siberia. UFOs were especially often observed near missile bases and nuclear facilities. In 1977, several luminous objects hovered over a strategic missile base in the Krasnoyarsk region. At that time, the entire missile control system failed. Computers rebooted. Communications were interrupted. When the objects disappeared after 20 minutes, everything worked as if nothing had happened. These incidents caused serious concern among the highest echelons of power. If an unknown force could disable nuclear weapons control systems, it posed a critical threat. A special unit of the Ministry of Defense was created to analyze cases of UFO appearances near strategic facilities. All the data was collected and analyzed, but no explanation was found. There are documents about attempts to shoot down UFOs. In several cases, pilots were ordered to use their weapons. Missiles were indeed launched, but either missed their target or exploded near it without causing any visible damage. In one case, according to the pilot's testimony, the missile passed through the object as if it were not there. After such incidents, orders to attack ceased. It became clear that conventional weapons were ineffective. More interesting are cases where UFOs seem to demonstrate intelligent behavior. In 1981, a group of geologists in Yakutia observed a glowing object repeating their actions. When they waved their flashlights, the object also flashed. When they drew geometric figures in the snow, the object repeated these figures with its movements. This continued for about half an hour. Then the object flew away. The geologists compiled a detailed report, which ended up in a special archive. There were also reports of UFO landings. Local residents in various parts of Siberia reported observing the landing of strange craft. At the sites of the alleged landings, burnt circles, deformed vegetation, and elevated radiation levels were discovered. The soil showed signs of exposure to very high temperatures. These sites were cordoned off by the military, and investigations were conducted, but the results were classified. The most mysterious incident occurred in the area of the Tunguska catastrophe. In 1986, an expedition of scientists studying the aftermath of the Tunguska meteorite discovery found a strange object partially buried in the ground. It was a metal disc about 10 meters in diameter, made of an unknown alloy. The material did not respond to any attempts to cut or deform it. The object was extracted and taken to a secret laboratory. What happened to this object is unknown. According to some reports, it was studied at a closed research institute near Novosibirsk. Scientists tried to understand how it worked and determine its origin. But the technology was so advanced that Soviet science could not understand it. There are rumors that compartments with incomprehensible equipment and even remains that did not belong to any known biological species were found inside the object. In the late 1980s, reports emerged of third-kind encounters, meetings between humans and creatures they described as non-human. Several cases occurred in the Altai region. Witnesses reported humanoid creatures about 2 meters tall, with large heads and huge eyes. These creatures allegedly communicated telepathically, transmitting images and emotions directly into the mind. One of the most detailed reports was left by a military intelligence officer who served at a secret facility in Buryatia. He claimed to have seen an object enter the restricted area, from which 2 humanoids emerged. They remained there for about 20 minutes, observing the equipment, then returned to their craft and flew away. During this time, the alarm systems did not work, and the surveillance cameras only recorded interference. The KGB took these reports seriously. Special teams were set up to visit the sites of the incidents, interview witnesses, and collect physical evidence. All the data was analyzed, but no single conclusion could be reached. Some experts believed that UFOs were secret developments by other countries. Others believed that they were natural phenomena. Still others allowed for extraterrestrial origins. In 1989, shortly before the collapse of the USSR, the first official report on UFO sightings was published. The Ministry of Defense acknowledged that such cases were indeed being recorded and studied. But most of the information remained secret. After the collapse of the Union, many documents were destroyed, others were removed, and still others are still kept in closed archives. Researchers of the UFO phenomenon believe that the archives of the Russian Special Services contain thousands of documents on cases of unidentified objects, physical samples of unknown origin, and possibly even biological materials. But access to this information is closed. Why? What is there that cannot be made public? Is there a connection between the secret research institutes of Siberia and the UFO phenomenon? Were attempts made to use extraterrestrial technology? And was there contact with representatives of other civilizations? The answers to these questions could change our understanding of humanity's place in the universe. Today, many of Siberia's secret research institutes are abandoned facilities, slowly decaying under the influence of time and nature. Researchers, extreme sports enthusiasts, and stalkers regularly visit these places, finding strange artifacts, documents, and equipment there. What they discover tells us more about the past of these facilities than official sources. One of the most famous abandoned sites is located in the Tomsk region. It is a former laboratory where experiments with radioactive materials were conducted. The building was mothballed in 1992 after an accident, about which little is known to this day. The area is officially closed due to radioactive contamination, but there are no guards, and enthusiasts sneak inside. Inside the building, there are remnants of equipment, rusty centrifuges, broken protective chambers, faded posters with safety instructions. In some rooms, the radiation level still exceeds the norm by tens of times. On the walls, you can see strange inscriptions, made, judging by the handwriting, in a hurry. Warnings, coordinates, incomprehensible symbols. Who left them and why is unknown. In the basement of this building, there is a sealed door with faded radiation hazard signs. A Geiger counter goes off next to it. Rumor has it that behind this door is the room where the accident occurred. There was a leak, and the staff was evacuated in a hurry. The room was filled with concrete, but it was not possible to completely seal it. Radiation continues to seep out. In the Krasnoyarsk region, there are the remains of the underground complex we mentioned earlier. Several entrances are walled up, but one, according to rumors, is still accessible through a system of old mines. Stalkers who have been there talk about kilometers of tunnels, huge halls filled with rusty equipment, and strange sounds coming from the depths. Some claim to have seen light in the far sectors, as if someone were working there. The danger of visiting such places is obvious. In addition to radiation and chemical contamination, there is a risk of cave-ins, encounters with wild animals that have made their lairs there, and losing one's bearings in the labyrinth of tunnels. But the strangest danger that visitors report is inexplicable psychological effects. People report feelings of anxiety, hallucinations, and the sensation of being watched. The abandoned Biological Research Institute in the Kolyma region is one of the most eerie places. The buildings stand empty, the windows are broken, and the roofs have collapsed. But inside, laboratory tables with test tubes, medical equipment, and even documents have been preserved. Everything is covered with a thick layer of dust and mold. One of the buildings houses a morgue with refrigerated chambers. Some of them still contain something, but no one dares to open them. The territory of this facility is heavily contaminated. The soil contains traces of toxic substances used in experiments. The vegetation in some places has ugly shapes, trees with twisted trunks, grass of a strange color. Local residents avoid this place, saying that the spirits of the dead prisoners live there. In the Novosibirsk region, you can find the remains of a Psychotronics institute. The main buildings have been demolished, but the underground part has been preserved. There are isolation chambers where experiments were conducted, the remains of equipment for electrical stimulation of the brain, and files with documentation. These documents are difficult to read. They contain descriptions of experiments that can hardly be called humane. One of the most mysterious discoveries was made in Yakutia. A group of tourists found a strange structure in the taiga, a concrete dome partially buried in the ground. There was no visible entrance, but faded inscriptions in Russian and another language, possibly Yakut, remained on the dome. The Geiger counter showed normal background radiation, but compasses near the dome refused to work properly, and electronic devices quickly ran out of power. Attempts to find out the purpose of this object have led nowhere. Local authorities deny its existence. Satellite images of this place show only forest, but photos and videos taken by tourists confirm that the object is real. What is it? The entrance to an underground laboratory? A storage facility for something dangerous? Or something else entirely? Many abandoned research institutes are still under some form of surveillance. Although there is no official security, local residents report helicopters periodically flying over these objects and people in uniform appearing from time to time. Who are they? Representatives of what organizations? And why do they need long-abandoned buildings? There is a theory that not all of these facilities are truly abandoned. Perhaps some activity continues, but secretly. The ruined buildings on the surface are just a cover for what is happening underground. This would explain the strange phenomena reported by visitors: sounds, lights, traces of recent activity. Some of the discoveries made in abandoned research institutes raise more questions than they answer. Strange samples in sealed containers, equipment of unknown purpose, documents in languages that no one can identify. All of this hints at research that goes beyond what is officially recognized. For lovers of mysteries and enigmas, the abandoned research institutes of Siberia are a real treasure trove. But visiting these places is fraught with real dangers: physical, legal, and possibly others that we do not even suspect. What do these ruins hide? What secrets are still buried within their walls? And why, decades after their closure, do these places continue to attract attention? Eyewitness accounts and declassified documents are gradually shedding light on what happened in the secret research institutes of Siberia. Since the late 1990s, publications by former employees have begun to appear, who are willing to break their non-disclosure agreements in order for the truth to come out. Their stories are supplemented by documents that are gradually being declassified by the special services. Viktor Petrovich Sokolov, a former engineer at one of the closed research institutes, published his memoirs in 1999 under the title Secrets of Underground Cities. He described his work in Krasnoyarsk-26 from the early 1970s to the mid-1980s. Sokolov talked about how the underground reactors worked, what accidents happened there, how many people received lethal doses of radiation, but all this was kept secret. His descriptions of Zone 3, the deepest level of the complex, were particularly impressive. Sokolov claimed that experiments were conducted there that even the city leadership did not know about. He personally saw strange equipment, unlike anything known, heard talk of attempts to create an artificial portal to other dimensions. After the book was published, Sokolov received threats, then suddenly died of an alleged heart attack. Maria Nikolaevna Volkova, a former nurse at the Biological Research Institute in Kolyma, talked about how new vaccines and drugs were tested on prisoners. She claimed that she saw people being infected with dangerous diseases without their consent, observing the development of the infection. Many died in terrible agony. The bodies were cremated, and the document stated that the person had died of natural causes. Volkova remained silent for a long time due to feelings of guilt, but eventually decided to tell the truth. Documents declassified in the early 2000s confirm many of these testimonies. The KGB archives contain reports on inspections of secret research institutes, which openly describe safety violations, cases of employee deaths, and experiments of dubious ethics. It is surprising that these reports were compiled, but there were no consequences. The projects were too important to the state. Colonel Sergei Alexandrovich Morozov, who worked in the KGB unit responsible for supervising secret facilities, gave an interview in 1997. He spoke about the system of surveillance of scientists and how any suspicion of disloyalty could lead to arrest. Morozov also mentioned cases where people were forcibly detained at facilities and not allowed to leave if they knew too much. The evidence about psychotronic research is particularly interesting. Several former participants in the program talked about what they had to go through. Konstantin Lebedev described how he was trained in remote viewing, how he could actually see distant objects while in a special state of consciousness. But the price was high. Constant headaches, psychological problems, and depression that still haunts him to this day. Partially declassified Defense Department documents confirm the existence of programs to develop paranormal abilities. They describe successful experiments in which clairvoyance provided information about enemy targets. But they also contain data on failures, on people who lost their minds, on cases where participants in the experiments reported contact with entities that should not have existed. The declassified documents also shed light on work with unidentified flying objects. In 2000, the Ministry of Defense acknowledged that from 1977 to 1991, more than 3,000 UFO sightings were recorded over the territory of the USSR. A significant portion of these sightings occurred in Siberia. It is impossible to explain all these cases by natural phenomena or observer error. One of the declassified documents describes an incident in 1984 when UFOs hovered over a missile base in the Krasnoyarsk region. The report states bluntly that the missile control systems were disabled by an external influence, the nature of which could not be determined. It also notes that attempts to intercept the objects were unsuccessful due to their incredible maneuverability. Evidence of the discovery of artifacts of extraterrestrial origin has also been confirmed. Professor Andrei Vasilievich Kuznetsov, a geologist who participated in the expedition to the Tunguska catastrophe site, spoke about the metal object that was found. He claimed that the material from which the object was made did not correspond to any known earthly alloy. Analysis showed the presence of isotopes that do not occur naturally on Earth. The former director of one of the research institutes, who wished to remain anonymous, gave an interview in 1999, where he spoke about a program to study the possibility of time travel. He claimed that some results had been achieved. It was possible to shift objects in time by fractions of a second. But the experiments were so dangerous that after several accidents, the program was shut down. Documents on climate weapons have also been partially declassified. They confirmed that work was underway to create systems for controlling the weather, causing earthquakes, and creating artificial tsunamis. Some technologies did work, but their use was deemed too unpredictable and dangerous. International agreements were signed to ban the development of such weapons, and the programs were officially shut down. However, many witnesses note that the full truth has not yet been revealed. Only those documents that do not contain the most secret information are being declassified. The most important materials remain in the closed archives of the FSB and the Ministry of Defense. By law, they are not subject to declassification for several more decades, if they are ever opened at all. Witnesses are also afraid to speak openly. Many of those who tried to tell the truth faced pressure, threats, and some died under mysterious circumstances. It seems that someone is very keen to prevent certain information from becoming public knowledge. Who is it? And what information are they hiding? Nevertheless, the picture is gradually becoming clearer. The secret research institutes of Siberia were indeed engaged in research that was not only on the edge of what was possible, but often crossed that line. Huge resources were invested there, the best minds of the country worked there, and thousands of people died there. All this was for the sake of victory in the Cold War, for the sake of technological superiority, for the sake of knowledge that could change the world. The modern secrets of Siberian research institutes are no less intriguing than their Soviet past. Despite the official closure of most secret facilities, there are signs that some research is continuing. The names, structures, and sources of funding have changed, but the work has not stopped. It has simply become even more secretive. In the 2000s, reports emerged about the construction of new underground facilities in Siberia. Officially, this is explained by the need to create secure storage facilities for strategic reserves, archives, and critical infrastructure. But the scale of construction and the level of secrecy suggest that something more than simple storage facilities is being created there. Local residents in the Novosibirsk area report strange activity. At night, they see helicopters flying to certain areas of the taiga where, according to official data, there is nothing. In the morning, tracks from tracked vehicles can be seen in the snow, leading into the forest and disappearing. Satellite images of these areas show only trees, but experts note signs of camouflage, too regular outlines, lack of natural clearings. In 2007, an incident occurred in the Krasnoyarsk region that attracted media attention. A group of tourists accidentally stumbled upon a fenced-off area deep in the taiga. The perimeter was guarded by armed men in uniform without identification marks. When the tourists tried to approach, they were detained. Their cameras and GPS navigators were confiscated, and a report was drawn up on the violation of the state border, even though they were in the center of Russia. After their release, they were forbidden to talk about what had happened. There is evidence that biological research is continuing. In 2010, an outbreak of an unknown disease occurred in the Tomsk region. The symptoms did not match any known infection. The sick were immediately isolated, specialists in protective suits arrived in the area, and the territory was cordoned off. 2 weeks later, it was announced that the outbreak had been eliminated, but no information was provided about what the disease was or where it came from. Psychotronic research also appears to have continued. In 2015, reports emerged that a new center for the study of human capabilities had been established in the Altai region. Officially, it is engaged in sports medicine and psychology, but some details are alarming. The center is funded directly from the federal budget through closed items. Access to it is strictly limited. Local residents talk about people with unusual abilities who have been seen in the vicinity of the center. Work on the study of UFOs continues under the auspices of various scientific organizations. Officially, it is called the study of anomalous atmospheric phenomena, but the essence is the same. Special observation posts are being set up, data is being collected, and cases are being analyzed. In 2019, military pilots recorded an object moving at a speed of more than 20,000 kilometers per hour over Yakutia. The information leaked to the press, but was quickly dismissed as a radar error. Of particular interest is the activity on Lake Baikal. In recent years, reports of strange phenomena on the lake have become more frequent. Fishermen tell of powerful underwater lights and strange objects floating to the surface at night. Scientists have discovered unexplained magnetic anomalies at the bottom of the lake. There is a theory that there is an underwater research center there, studying something related to the unique properties of Lake Baikal. In 2018, an incident occurred in the Irkutsk region. Residents of several villages reported an earthquake that lasted several minutes, but seismological stations did not record anything. A few days later, the military appeared in the area and conducted some measurements. Then the residents were told that these were exercises to test the population's preparedness for natural disasters. But many did not believe this explanation. Technologies developed in secret Soviet research institutes can still be used today. There are suspicions that climate weapons are being secretly developed, despite international bans. Some experts link the unusual weather phenomena of recent years, abnormal heat, sudden cold spells, and hurricanes of unprecedented strength, to these weapons.